You need to put all of those attributes together and be able to make the deal happen. So as my boss once said, look, at the end, I give you a deal, you'll make it happen at the end.
Ruby Chen, thank you so much for joining me on 20 Minute Leaders. Good morning to me, good evening to you. How are you?
I am doing fine. So hopefully, from the name, you were not envisioning some sort of Chinese lady from Singapore. It is a bit misleading. So I get that a lot when people, see me and expect to see a female instead of maybe a Jewish kid from New York City, which I am actually from.
So what is the story behind the Chen? I haven't met many Jewish people from Brooklyn with the last name Chen.
So it depends who asks. So, if it is, people that are close to me, so it is actually a abbreviation of a longer Jewish name. But I did have the opportunity when working at Amdocs, which is a multinational company on the M&A team. We actually acquired a company in France that the main customer was China Mobile.
Okay.
So, they needed to send somebody to China to explain that we will continue the commitments of the company and everything is good. So who did they send? They sent the Chinese guy.
Of
So
course.
I,
Of
of
course.
course, was supposed to meet some Chinese executive from China Mobile. And when I walked in, he was like looking, wait a second, where's that Chinese lady that I was supposed to meet? So I invented some family out in China. It's a not that much of a known fact, but during World War II, as you know, the most of the borders were closed for Jewish people that wanted to exit Europe. But actually, one
Right.
of the countries that did have their borders open was actually China. So there is actually a
Really?
Chinese Jewish community that that populated during World War II. So
Wow,
I made up
that's
some
quite a long
Chinese
commute.
family, and we ended up being far distant cousins, and from there the deal went pretty well.
I think that's phenomenal. That's a phenomenal story. Ruby, we have a lot of things to talk about from running accelerators when they weren't necessarily cool, all the way to doing corporate venture capital, which is also a little bit of a new phenomena that I've seen on the crazy uprising in the past few years. But you actually again did that before it was cool. So I'm starting to see a pattern here of identifying trends. So there's a lot for me to learn here. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey? How do you get to being director at these fantastic companies and then being on the wave of these great trends?
Well, to the young audience here, I would have liked to say that there was a plan and a scheme behind it, but it kind of happens by accident
Right.
more often than not. So in my personal case, coming from New York City and being native, U.S. speaker, so being here in Israel, that was kind of like a unfair competitive advantage. So that's how I got into the high tech business to begin with. It started by joining a semi-governmental entity here in Israel that provided subsidized economic services to startups, meaning
Mm,
writing the business plans and talking about marketing plans. So, having that native English backend, kind of helped me get into that domain. And I was working in a entity that had a lot of startups that we supported. And
mhm.
there I got to know a little bit of the ecosystem and talking to people and getting to understand that, and that's how I got into my first gig, which was at a venture capital firm here in Israel called Stage One Ventures. It
Okay.
was a $35 million fund. The main LPs was Bezeq, which is the Israeli quad play
Right.
telecommunication player,
I didn't realize that
and
that they
also
have an arm into venture capital. This is so interesting.
hey, hey, dude, I'm a bit ancient, so I'm talking about 20 years ago. So take everything in perspective. But
Unbelievable.
it was something that Visic did at the past, and the idea of the fund, because it was a relatively small fund, was to ask itself, okay, how do I maximize the capital commitment that I have? And at that time, Israel had and still does a program of technology incubators, which at the
Hmm.
time was owned and managed by the state of Israel. And
Wow.
they came to the conclusion, the state of Israel, that managing an incubator isn't probably one of the core competencies of a state, and that's
Right.
why they wanted to privatize it. And stage
Now,
one,
when are we
identifying
talking
this,
about?
kind
What
of
year?
talking about 2001, 2002.
Wow.
So
That's
looks like about
unbelievable.
20 years ago.
Right.
Time flies when you're having fun, man. So the idea was to use those people that do not know about this program. It's a pretty innovative program that the state of Israel created in the mid 90s when there was that large influx of Russian immigrants. And instead of just having these people do, low level work because they did not know the language, the state wanted to utilize these people and be able to utilize the technology capabilities that they have. So they created this program
Wow.
that basically subsidized the first, 2 years of R&D development. That the state of Israel takes most of the risk associated with that. So as a
Wow.
private investor, you put in $1 and the state gives you $4 back, up to a budget of about $600,000, which is good for
Wow.
about a year and a half. So what the evolution of the program was is that you had this large influx of Russians, but it was also open to other types of entrepreneurs as well, not only Russian immigrants. But as I described previously, the state, after a couple of years, understood it would be better to move it to private hands. And that's
Now,
when you
why
had,
is that? So
either
why what
angel.
was tell me a little bit about this transition because it's a really interesting piece of the history. Today there must be, dozens, if not hundreds of incubators and accelerators just in Israel, right? And just in Tel Aviv, and not even counting those in Jerusalem and the different areas. What was that process like for the Israeli state, is the government, to run one of the first incubators, to start that trend, and then make that rational decision of moving it to private hands?
Yeah, so I think the state of Israel was able to identify pretty amazingly a market inefficiency.
Hmm.
And throughout the years of the program, even today, the way that the chief innovation officer of the state of Israel looks at it is to identify those market inefficiencies that evolve over the
Right.
years. So at the beginning, saying, okay, look, this early stage of investments, there's a gap here. So there are VCs that do investments, but they do not want to take that high level of risk. So how do I identify or create such a program that can deal with that inefficiency? And over the years, it has changed. So many years ago, the state of Israel identified that biotech is a bit underserved. So they created a program specifically for biotech companies. And,
Right.
and being always on top of things, trying to understand. And over the years, as being a CEO of a technology incubator, also in the city of Tel Aviv, compared to maybe an incubator in the north of Israel or the south, you could guess I was on speed dial of many of the different delegations that were visiting here in Israel that tried to
Sure.
understand and duplicate this program. And actually, we had the opportunity, and many times actually, to visit different countries, Europe, Asia, anything in between, saying, look, we want to try to duplicate this for our ecosystem. But the question is, which is a long conversation that we don't have time to go into today, is what is the special ingredients that enabled the Israeli ecosystem to flourish and to be
Right.
what it is today, the startup nation. So that's a long conversation, but anyone that wants to hear more about that, we can go into that into detail. So I did the technology incubator thing at the beginning. We were able to utilize Bezic and play with the Bezic labs, which means telecommunication,
Right.
cybersecurity. Before that was cool as well. Different types of technologies. The
Again, we're
best
talking about 20 years ago,
investment
right? Unbelievable.
15, 18 years ago. Yeah. So the best exit that we had actually was a company we put in $600,000, a company in the telecommunication authentication space that was called Trafix. Systems that was acquired by F5 for $130 million a
Wow.
few years after. So do the math yourself. You understand. From a $30 million fund, that sounds like a nice return on investment.
100%.
So did that for about 4 years, and then being able to have experience of playing or being in interaction with a large corporate like Bezic to identify new investments and utilize that, I was recruited by a New York Stock Exchange traded Israeli company called Amdocs, Amdocs, which is a pretty big company in Israeli standards. Its
Right.
market cap is about $12 billion today. They sell about $5 billion annually. So what they do
Crazy.
is they provide software solutions for telecommunication and media companies. So think about the billing of your mobile phone from AT&T at the end of the month. That is being generated from a Amdocs billing system. When you call into a call center of a Verizon, that also the back end, the software is a Amdocs system more often than not. And if you think about the network itself, the 3G, 4G, 5G, all that software that manages the different networks is also managed by an Amdocs system. So
Wow.
Amdocs at the time also had a open innovation program, and this is again talking 2007,
Wow.
2008, and they had a small team that was supposed to interact with the Israeli ecosystem, and one program was to take a startup technology, combine it with a Amdocs solution, create a new offering, and then sell it to an AT&T or to a Verizon or T-Mobile. They had another small team that also had the action item of when having delegations such as AT&T or Vodafone visit is to match between the Israeli startups to the requirements of the telecommunication company, working very closely with the sales teams of
Right.
Amdocs to be able to identify missing gaps and to understand what the requirements are. So they were missing that small program to get some skin in the game. So saying, look, if we're helping these startups develop, these new technologies, products based on requirements, and we're also selling it for them, why not
Why not
have a
also?
venture program?
Right.
So
Makes perfect
that is
sense.
what's called the CVC, which is a corporate venture capital program. So I was given the task, okay, go figure it out and go create something. So today, when you think about CVCs, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of programs like that within the
Right.
Fortune 1000. I think maybe 80% of them have some sort of program like that. But go back about 12 years ago, not that common. So
Right.
at the time, there wasn't too many people to study and to try to duplicate what can be done. So in Israel, we had Cisco, which had a venture program. We had Motorola, which also were one of the first ones. IBM, which have been
Wow.
here also for many years. But there weren't too many. So how do you put together an investment charter? Meaning, okay, how do you invest and what do you invest? Who's the investment committee?
Right.
Uh, so typically you need to have a CFO because she signs the check at the end of the day. But you have someone from product, you have somebody from sales. Do you create a fund with a dedicated capital that is dedicated to investments, or does it come out of the balance sheet? So all of these questions, were kind of open with me given the task of
Wow.
go figure it out and come up with something. I would like to share one anecdote
Please.
of that process. The CEO of Amdocs at the time, his name was Dov Baharav. Of course, I wanted him on the investment committee. You always want the CEO
Right.
on the investment committee, but actually he said something that had a lot of sense, and over the years I even believe it even more in what he had to say. He said, "Look, if I'm on the investment committee, everybody else will wait to listen what I have to say and then make their decision. It would be better for you not to have me on the investment committee. And then, you could have that open discussion that you're looking for to find, those hidden gems that might, might not come onto our radar because it's not currently in high priority. But the intention of the program was indeed to find those types of companies that are up and coming that
Right.
maybe at a corporate culture you might miss. So started doing that. Made a lot of investments in the mobility space. The more famous ones is in the mobile advertising space, a company called Amobi,
Hmm.
which was acquired by Singtel for $340 million.
Wow.
We invested in another company in Israel that did mobile payment. Again, I'm talking about 2008, 2009,
Wow.
which was sold to Gemalto, the SIM manufacturer. We also had a company called Pontus that actually justified the model of a CVC, meaning you invest in a company sometimes because you're not prepared to do the M&A yet. So you say, you know what, let me put some cash in. I get some ability to influence the company. And also if there
Right.
is an acquisition on the table, then I'm able to manage that maybe more quickly and be able to act on that. So this company called Pontus, which we invested in 2008, was eventually acquired by Amdocs, which kind of justifies the
Right.
model of
Right.
why to do a CVC sometimes.
So what it sounds to me is
So
that
did
the difference with CVC is that CVC is it is very similar to venture capital in the sense that you're buying equity into another business for various incentives, but you're introducing another layer of complexity, both because of the different interests that could arise. So when a regular VC invests, it's primarily for the financial returns, but when introducing a corporate venture capital fund, there's also all sorts of incentives. One of those, for example, is to be able to influence the decision making of a company, which could potentially at some point merge into yours. And you want to be able to either influence their technology, their roadmap, their financials, their other customers. So it sounds like it's very complicated, and I think it's really inspiring that you got to be there and be really a pioneer from what it sounds like in a world where today, like you're mentioning, almost every Fortune 1000 company has a venture capital arm.
Yeah, and it has evolved over the year. This also could be a one-on-one session of a CVC. So over the years, there have been developed different flavors of types of CVCs. So just going
Right.
fast forward with myself, moving from Amdocs to another corporate called NICE,
Hmm.
which is traded on the NASDAQ. Also,
Right.
market cap is about 12 billion today. It's a enterprise software company that
Hmm.
captures unstructured data sets, normalizes them, and finds insights. So it's a data analytics company where the main data source that they started was voice.
Right.
So again, think about large B2C organizations, banks, telcos, media companies. So when you call into one of those entities, you have that annoying message at the beginning that says this call is now being recorded
Right.
for compliance issues. So 8 out of 10 times in North America, that would be a nice system. And by
Wow.
capturing that actual data and being able to do speech to text
Right.
analytics, emotion detection, next best action for the call agent itself, there's a lot of value that is hidden in that. So at that entity as well, I was at the corp dev team
Hmm.
doing ventures and M&As. And the last 2 years, I actually established and led the Hyundai Motor Company
Wow.
venture activities here in Tel Aviv. So I've been doing CVCs for over 12 years. So there's a
Amazing.
lot to be said and to be, discussed about, if you're a young guy that wants to get into that space, I could be glad, give me a call, look me up. I'll be glad to share some of the insights and some of the
Wonderful.
things that I've gone through over the
Wonderful. No,
years.
Ruby, it sounds like there's more hours of more of content that we could talk about that would be fascinating, whether it's the Israeli ecosystem and watching it from the roots of it, 20 years ago with Bezek, and then moving on to CVCs and seeing where that trend is going today, to talking about mobility and enterprise software. There's endless more that we could discuss, but unfortunately, we do have only 20 minutes, so I have to ask you the last and most important question, which is 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Yeah, that's a nice question to ask. I would start with curious. So
Yeah.
starting from telecom and then doing enterprise software and then Autotech. So I guess I'm just waiting for that corporate that's in the biotech space. So I could feel that I've checked all the boxes. A deal maker.
Yeah.
So one of my previous bosses said, and this is again maybe something to the younger audience. How do you become the best deal maker? So as my
Right.
boss once said to me in a larger audience, it's not because I'm the guy that knows how to build the best Excel
Right.
for the financial model. It's not being the best technology guy that knows how to, understand and understand the technology benefit. It's not the HR side, which is also highly, appreciated at the end because it's a people thing. If you acquire a company or you invest in a company, it's a people business. But
Right.
you need to put all of those attributes together and be able to make the deal happen. So as my boss once said, look, at the end, I give you a deal, you'll make it happen at the end. And I think,
Right.
that's a very nice compliment to
I love
have. And
that.
also, for those young people to think about that as well. Last but not least, I think connected.
Yeah.
So being part of this ecosystem, not only the Israeli ecosystem, but the corporate venture capital ecosystem for the last 20 years, you get to know people. And at the end, you have that ability to be familiar with people over the years. And then when you do come to them and come with ideas and want to collaborate, based on that reputation that you're able to build for yourself over the years, that, is something that's very hard to establish and it's
Right.
very easy to lose. So you need to be very, diligent, on those types of approaches and who do you approach and when. So being that connector, I think also something that is highly important to think about as well. And now we have the Dubai ecosystem as well that Michael, you just came back from, that maybe
Right.
you could say a word or two about building bridges and being a guy that could connect between the dots is something that is
Right.
a skill set that, I think still is required today.
And I think that one of the most, like you mentioned, I just literally 12 hours ago got back from Dubai. This will be shared with our audience in a few weeks, but just got off the flight recently, and I think one of the things that fascinated me most was understanding cultural differences and really opening ourselves up to a whole new world where business is important, but connections and human to human connections and trust is at the forefront of these business endeavors. And I think that that is something that I was very inspired by this week. I got so used to the Western way of doing business and talking to each other and forming relationships. It's very different over there, and I'm just starting to learn how to do it, and I can't. I'm 100% sure that Dubai and that part of the world is going to be a major part of my professional life, and probably that of many people in Israel and the US. So I think that we need to start from the culture. But I definitely take to heart what the insights from this talk. And Ruby, I really want to thank you for being so generous with your time. It was really, really wonderful. Thank you for the inspiration. And I have a feeling we're going to have to do a few more episodes to really capture some of those other insights that you were talking about.
Yeah, we'll be glad to share, my insights. So any of the young guys out there listening or ladies, please,
Wonderful.
feel free to reach out. We'll be glad to share.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ruby. Take care.